Hello, this is Michael Pucciarelli, and this video is going to talk about how I use Photoshop with my light painting. There'll be another webinar on how I use Bridge, but this webinar is going to talk about how I use Adobe Photoshop. First, I'm going to deselect all the layers. Now, this image, I used a separate LED flashlight for the stones, a separate LED flashlight for the flowers, and then a lighting wand for the backgrounds. So first thing I do is I do a levels adjustment, and I just make it, I drag it all the way to the left. And then these are just, these layers I do later, and I do my signature. And then what I do is in Bridge, I have folders of various, objects painted by a LED light. And I always have a gray card for every different LED light I use. So I find the JPEG, I copy it, I make a selection, I copy it, and when I paste it, I use a special action where I paste into place. I just have the, blend mode of Lighten. And then I get, a soft brush. So we're going to be painting, when I paint, white reveals, black hides. When I paint, this is what I get. Now, if I do too much, then I got to switch the color of the black by just pressing the X key. The same thing. And I run that action. Paste in place. And then I set the blend mode to Lighten. And then I just, I use a very soft brush, normal brush mode, opacity 100, and I paint. And if I go too much, I switch it to black and I paint what I don't want to see. White reveals, black hides. And I copy the image from a JPEG. And then, I run the action. I paste it into place, and then I set the blend mode to Lighten. Do the same thing. So all these, objects, I used a certain LED flashlight, and before I started light painting with the LED flashlight, I have a gray card measurement to sync all the natural colors, to sync the white balance. Now this is done with a different LED flashlight where I would use a new gray card measurement where I'd find the JPEG, I'd load up the JPEG, I'd copy it, I'd make a selection, I'd do Control C, Control the Command C, I'd copy it. Then I run this action where I paste into place and I use a Lighten blend mode. So go to Edit. I'm going to bring this out a little better. So if I do like this, Control C, and then paste into place. But I already have it done in action. And all I have to do is I find the JPEG, I make the selection, I select what I want to see, I do Control or Command C, and then I just, I run this action, I paste it into place, and then I set the blend mode to lighten. The same thing, I'd find the JPEG, I'd select the flower in the JPEG, I do Control C, and then actions, I paste into place, and then I do a lighten blend mode. And then if I paint too much, I got to press the X key. I got to hide what I don't want to see. And if I want to show what I want to see, I use white. So, white reveals, black hides. And all these flowers, they use the same LED flashlight. But before I start light painting the flowers, I would light paint the gray card so to sync the white balance. And this is with the wands. This is with the new type of LED flashlight. This is a powerful LED flashlight. It's the lighting wand by Godox. You can do a lot with the light. It's a powerful light. And so I would do a gray card measurement, and then I would sync the raw files with the gray card measurement to avoid color cast. And then I can run various actions. I always run my doesn't scratch filter, my speckle. And sometimes I run with the sharpen with the high pass. Sometimes I run with a speckle, my dozen scratches. I'm going to try to mess with the fade. So when I do a filter, fade will bring up the last filter you use. And fade, where I'd use luminosity blend mode, and I just have the opacity at 100. This is great for contrast. And how I use actions, I have them grouped where if I play this, all this will happen one right after the other. So then when you export, I use actions for practically everything. I always start with my save. I would save it. And then if I save it, legacy web jetport, I'd use this. When I use export, oops. The export preferences, I always want to use JPEG quality 100. I always want to ask every time where I export it, since I'm posting to the web, I want to have this convert to sRGB. Now, if I want to copy and paste in Photoshop, I do not want to have this checked. And when I create the JPEGs, I use an image processor, and I always make sure that you do not want to have this checked off if you're copying and pasting in Photoshop. But since I'm posting to the web, I want to make sure I do have this checked off, because if I were to use this file, convert to sRGB in Photoshop, you have a color mismatch problem, and Photoshop doesn't like that. And that's why, if you copy the JPEG in Photoshop and use it again in Photoshop, then make sure you don't have this checked off. Not going to save any changes. This is another image that I did, and you know, the first thing I do is, you know, have a level adjustment layer, and you know, I drag the dark all the way to the left, and then I run my signature, and then where these are all, I'd be copying these from JPEG. I'd find the JPEG, I'd make a selection, do Control C, and then I'd run this action, I'd paste into place, blend mode lighten. So edit. So I want to bring that menu up again. So if I were to, you know, this were a JPEG and I were to make a selection, I do Control C, and then edit, paste special, paste into place. And that's why I already had this action. So I'd find the JPEG, I'd select my object, I'd go to Control C or Command C for copy, I run this action, I paste into place, and I have the blend mode set to lighten. I do the same procedure with all the objects. The blend mode is always on lighten, where I find the JPEG, make a selection, and I'm always painting on the layer mask, and I'm using a, you know, a brush. For opacity is 100%, brush mode normal, and I'm painting in whites. You know, white reveals, black hides, and if I paint too much, then I gotta press the X key, and I gotta hide what I don't want to see. And then if I want to unhide what I want to see, I press the X key again, and now I'm painting white on a black layer mask to bring out my objects. And I use a certain LED flashlight for the fruit, and then another certain LED flashlight for the, you know, antlers, where every time I use a new flashlight, I'm going to have a gray card balance where I could sync the white balance. And this is done by a wands, but in this, you know, so these two are, these are exported JPEGs, but before I use the light ones, I would use the light one and do a gray card measurement. And so in a, you know, bridge, I would sync the properties. Now I'm just using the adjustment layer to bring the flavor that I like. And if I want to export it, and I got my actions, I can either, you know, I can do two things. I can just run the action here. I could just go up here and, you know, export, do a quick export, and it'll prompt me. And, you know, my export, you know, preferences, I always have a JPEG quality 100. I'm going to ask every, you know, we're at the export each time. Since I'm posting to the web, and this is the final product, which is here on the web, that I do want to have this checked. Now, if I'm going to copy and paste in Photoshop, I do not. Like with the image processor, that's with, you know, Adobe Bridge, that's another lecture. And then for the frame, I do the same thing with the frame, where I call this, in this frame, it calls other actions. And then it has a condition. If it's landscape, do this. If it's not landscape, do else. And these actions are called. So this is an action that calls many other actions. That's how you produce this, you know, black frame. These are apples. Let's go to this one. Oops. I'll do the apples. Okay, apples. For the apples is I'm using a certain lead flashlight in the apples. But before I light paint the apples, I do a gray card measurements. So under, Adobe Bridge, I click for the white balance, and I also clip the optics, the operations of camera profile. And there's the only two settings I use for this. And this antler is done by another lead flashlight. But before I start light painting with another lead flashlight, I need another gray card measurements. So this is, the antler is, I use a very soft brush. I want to make the brush bigger. I press the, French braces key. So I'd go to the JPEG, I would copy it, and then I'd paste it. And you actually paste into place. So run this action. Oops. Gonna find my, here it is, my light paint paste, where I have the JPEG open, I make the selection, I do Control or Command C, and I paste into place, and I have the blend mode of Lighten, where do Control Command C, especially for the JPEG, with an edit, paste special, paste into place, where I run this action, light paint into place, and I would do the same thing. Copy, and I would, I'd paste into place. Now this is with the new, lead flashlight. So I had to do a new gray card measurement, and the apples were done with another lead flashlight. But before I did the light painting of the apples, I had to do a new gray card measurements. Now in this shot, I forgot to use the lighting wand, so there wasn't enough light in the subject, but I had a solution where I had a small, lead light aiming at an angle, and I made it look natural. I put some, impact and direction to the photograph. Again, and sometimes, if you have a JPEG, you can just select the JPEG and just paint in what you like. This one was a challenging one, trying to get the color of the bottles and the color of the fruit. This is real fruit. This is not real fruit. And sometimes I like to sprinkle water to make it look real. So all the fruit were done by a certain lead flashlight. But before I start light painting the fruit, I would light paint the gray card. Just hold a light steady at a gray card and let that be the white balance, sink, the sink for the white balance. And then I use another, lead light for this. And the same thing before I start light painting, I would have, the gray card here. I would just shine my lead light at the gray card, and then I light paint, and I pick up the best files. And so I'd always pick up the gray card to sync the white balance. First I'd set the white balance with a gray card, but then I would sync it. These are all separate layers. These are just layers from the background object, filters. I always start with a blank layer where I drag it, the shadows all the way to the left. Put my signature there. Just an action. And then I would find the JPEG, make a selection, Control C, and then I would just run. Let's see, where's my, here it is. My M50 light painting paste into place in light and blend mode. Every time I'd find the JPEG, make a copy, Control C, I would just run this action. And I'd run the action, open the JPEG, make a selection, run the action. The same thing after I copy it, run the action, run the action, run the action. Now this, I would use a new gray, this is with a different LED light. So I would have a new gray card measurement. And these are all the same gray card. And it was a tough one where I may have taken many exposures of each, but I only want the best ones. And that's, light painting can be really tough at times. And these last ones are done with the wand, but before I start light painting with the wands, I have the gray card on the table and I would just aim the lighting wand for a few seconds or towards it's probably exposed, and use that to set the white balance these other parts. And I'll talk about my frame action one more time, where, this is my frame, and it calls this, and this calls this, and this happens. Other actions happen where this is called. Well, they're here. We have a condition. And this condition many actions here. And these actions are called based on a condition. Here's a condition. And this is landscape. Big, width is called. Else, the big height is called. And then the last set of actions. Still, I like to use this, but when I work with street people, I don't like to do this. Sometimes you have to learn things the hard way, but it's the way you learn. But where oops, there we go. Where I run actions. Run them in groups. When this happens, the speckle, these happens one right after the other. And when this happens, the dust and scratches, the speckle, and the unsharp mask happens. Again, when this group of actions happens, one right after the other, again, when I were to, I would, let's see. I would first run this action. I would save it. I'd save it the new name. And then when I save a JPEG, where, the settings are already there, Since I'll be posting to the web, I do want to convert to sRGB. If you're to copy and paste in Photoshop, I do not want to have this checked. And, so that concludes my, how I use Adobe Photoshop with light painting. Maybe I'll definitely do a short webinar on how I use Bridge. Thank you for listening to this webinar. This is Mike Pucciarelli, creator of Still Life Photography, Michael Pucciarelli YouTube channel. That I have sections on the white plex table, the black plex table, light paintings, software equipment. So feel free to join, subscribe, and like, join my mailing list. Thank you for listening to this webinar.